Hello and welcome to module number 4, Scrum Artifacts, in the PeopleCert Scrum Master 1 certification training course from One World Training. Initially, we began with an introduction to the Scrum Master 1 course. Then we began module 1, an introduction to Agile Project Management, covering about 4 marks in the exam. Module number 2 was an introduction to Scrum, wherein you can expect about 3 questions in the exam. Module 3 was about the Scrum team with the product owner, developers, and the Scrum master, wherein you can expect around 4 marks or 4 questions in the exam. This module is about the Scrum artifacts, and it is an important one because it covers about 12 questions from the exam. So let's look at what the various Scrum artifacts are, which is one of the elements within the Scrum framework. So once again, there are 3 key elements in the Scrum framework. The Scrum team, which we already covered with the product owner, Scrum master, and the developers. Then we have artifacts, which we will cover now, which include the product backlog, the sprint backlog, and the usable increment. In another module, number 5, we will cover the Scrum events, which will include the sprint events such as sprint planning, daily Scrum, sprint review, and sprint retrospective, and optionally, product backlog refinement. I say optionally because it's not a formal event in the Scrum framework. However, it is used frequently and almost always. Scrum artifacts. These artifacts represent work or value. They are designed to maximize the transparency of key information. Thus, everyone inspecting them has the same basis for adaptation. These 3 artifacts are the only ones referred to in the Scrum Guide and therefore identified as such in this course. In practice, organizations may identify other artifacts as part of their Scrum practices. The 2020 Scrum Guide introduced the idea of commitments in addition, and each of the commitments for every artifact will be discussed in further detail as we look at each of the 3 artifacts. Commitments help the teams to embrace and live every day the Scrum values. Artifacts and their commitments. Each artifact contains a commitment to ensure it provides information that enhances transparency and focus against which progress can be measured. Commitments exist to reinforce empiricism and the Scrum values for the Scrum team and their stakeholders. On this slide, we see the 3 artifacts, the product backlog, sprint backlog, and the increment, which is delivered at the end of every sprint or iteration. The commitment for the product backlog is the product goal. The commitment for the sprint backlog is the sprint goal, and the commitment for the increment is the definition of done. We pause here for you to make a note of any questions you might have to explore further in some of the books which you can study in addition to this course before writing the exam. As such, our course covers everything you need to prepare for the exam, but there are around 6 books, including the Scrum Guide, which are highly valuable for a deeper and clearer understanding of Scrum. We continue in module 4, but we begin with the first Scrum artifact, which is the product backlog. The product and the product goal. A product is a vehicle to deliver value. It has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, and well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. The items in the backlog will be dependent upon what an organization considers a product. For example, is it software, training materials, physical products, a service such as support or customer care, or something abstract like an advertising campaign? The nature of that will decide what comes within the product. The product goal is the long-term objective for the Scrum team and is in the product backlog. It describes a future state of the product that serves as a target for the Scrum team to plan against. The product goal is the commitment. The product goal describes the future state of the product, which can serve as a target for the Scrum team to plan against. The product goal is within the product backlog. The rest of the product backlog emerges or adapts to define what will fulfill the product goal. A product is a vehicle to deliver value. It has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. And it can be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. I have repeated a few things just to make it very clear. Therefore, the product goal is a long-term objective for the Scrum team. They must fulfill one objective before they take on the next. Note that Scrum needs to focus on the outcome and value and not just the solution itself. A small directed learning activity for you. In your own work environment, return to your activity and write down the expected outcome or outcomes and value proposition for the solution being sought for your problem or project and product. Then write down what you consider to be the product goal. Here are some examples of product goals for your reference. Number one, create a website for cake and flower shops to sell their products online. Another example, increase company presence in the market. This can also be a product goal by selling a product. And the last example here is increase annual revenue by 20% after the product is sold. So you see every product, physical or electronic, may lead to such product goals. Please think around these lines to create your own product goal. We now come back to the product backlog artifact and learn more about it. The product backlog is an emergent ordered list of what is needed to improve the product. As we see the picture here on the right, it first includes the product goal, wherein I specified a few examples, and it includes several PBIs, product backlog items. It's a single source of work undertaken by the Scrum team, and it includes a commitment, and the product goal is the commitment, which is shown at the top of the product backlog in the picture at the right. The accountability for effective backlog management, as we learned in the previous module, the Scrum team, lies with the product owner. The meaning of emergent here is that the backlog is not complete when the first sprint or iteration begins. It will continue to emerge over time. The team, therefore, will start work when there are enough items in the backlog defined by the product owner to do so. If this is a product being created, then the product roadmap or the path, such as releases coming forward, will likely dictate what the team will start with. The ordering of the items, meaning the ranking of the items within the backlog, will occur repeatedly as the backlog grows through the refinement activity, which we'll discuss later on. The refinement, in simple words, is preparation for subsequent sprints to clearly understand what work needs to be done in a couple of subsequent sprints. Product backlog items and labels. The Scrum Guide does not prescribe labels for different types of product backlog items. Labels are only important from the perspective of standardizing their use in an organization. Some of the commonly used terms, which are here below, but not mentioned in the Scrum Guide, are epic, feature, and user story. Note that the product backlog is the single source of work. If it is not there in the backlog, the Scrum team won't work on it if somebody else tells them to work on something which is not in the backlog. Epic. Epic is a broadly defined too large to be completed in a single sprint. For example, allow the customer to manage accounts online could be a requirement in the form of an epic. But to make it more clear, it has to be broken down into features and further into user stories. Feature represents a collection of related user stories. For example, if we think about the same epic to allow the customer to manage accounts online, one of the features could be the customer can edit their profile information. User story. User story describes a discrete part of a feature or overall functionality. Example, for the same epic and the feature within that epic, the customer can change their address, so which is very specific. So user story becomes even more clear and detailed.